Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm very much happy to be part of this festival, quite inspiring, and I'm very much grateful to the organizers and the author of the book, my colleague Mikael, for making me part of this interesting session. I'm Alebachew Belay, Assistant Professor of Archaeology and Heritage Studies at Debre Berhan University in Ethiopia. Some of you might know. And I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher of the GATES program at the University of Grenoble Alpes in France. Just to say a bit about Mikael's inspiring production of this book entitled Bastions of the Cross, Medieval Rocket Cruciform Churches of Tigray, Ethiopia. So it basically has three important components, as we can easily notice from the title itself. One is the medieval period, which has for long been neglected in the Horn of African research and studies, and also for long designated to be the Dark Age by many. So one of the introductions or one of the inputs, the contributions of this Mikael's work, as he will explain a bit more later in detail, is to challenge this wrong perception of this important period in the history of the Horn of Africa. And then we have this rocket, another important theme. Although we have hundreds of sites of this kind in Ethiopia, in particular in northern Ethiopia. A few of them have received proper research attention. So this team itself is an interesting team when it comes to the art, architectural, archaeological research in the region, with its specific focus on cruciform churches. In addition to this, Mikael's approach, specifically a comparative approach that he made in between three important rocket structures in Tigray region of northern Ethiopia, Mikael Amba, Abrahawatzba, and Ukro Kirkos, is quite inspiring. A few of the previous researchers have tried to triangulate the interconnection among different rocket structures in the region. So this can by itself be taken as an important approach way that young and emerging scholars from the region are taking proper lesson on this. So apart from this, just to add a bit, his inclusion and his research emphasis on the interconnections that are exemplified in this rocket church production, not only intra-regional one, but also intercontinental connections are well addressed, well tested, and well explained in this important book, Bastions of the Cross. So he tried to connect and see the Byzantine impressions, the Byzantine legacies and traces in these three important rock churches in the region, and also especially in terms of the use of textiles of that time. He had a very good comparative assessment with the textile production, which was being imported from the Indian Ocean world. So he tried to connect at least three water bodies, the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, as well as the Red Sea as a mediator. So as I have got the chance to review his book, I just found it to be quite impressive, and it is highly recommended to our students at various levels in Ethiopia, for which we have limited resources to consult on this and related topics. So I'm very much happy to be part of this session and to share Mikael's brief introduction about his book. So Mikael, now the floor is yours. I request the audience to mute speakers and if possible videos, and to leave your comments and suggestions as well as questions in the QA and a chat box. That's how we are going to entertain the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you so much, Alebachew, for that kind introduction. And I will advise everyone listening to take a look at his review of my book, because it's one of those reviews that really delves into the all the details of the book. So My 2023 book, Bastions of the Cross, which is depicted here, is the first full study of three closely linked buildings in the region of Tigray, Ethiopia. Bouras-Vallianatos over here, Wukrocherkos, and Mikael Muehlbauer. And these monuments really remain largely undocumented, undated, and little known outside of the field of Ethiopian studies, which is still very small. And I suggest in my book that they should be understood as some of the most important monuments from the Middle Ages more broadly, because they were a millennial revival and the first and only localization of early Byzantine aisled cruciform churches in Ethiopia. They're also the first churches in Ethiopia to incorporate vaulted ceilings, and also the only ones to do so in the service of centralized spatial hierarchy, akin to the spatial massing that you find in Byzantine churches, both in late antiquity and in Middle Byzantium. These construction projects were revolutionary endeavors and reversed a trend of otherwise small-scale and conservative architecture in the region in favor of large, innovative, and modular buildings. Built in the late 11th century, their local constructions were bound up with the globe. Ethiopian masons expanded upon time-tested rock-cutting techniques and used their skills to carve innovative churches in rock of an unparalleled scale, while resuscitated pilgrimage networks brought Ethiopian Christians to far-flung locales like Constantinople and Asia Minor, while participation in Islamic mercantile channels brought precious textiles from South Asia into Ethiopia, particularly under the Fatimids. Pilgrimage networks allowed craftsmen to revisit architectural types that were abandoned for half a millennium, while imported cloths inspired transmaterial conceptions of architectural space. Standing for a millennium, these churches were vessels of a changing liturgy, as well as new forms of popular piety. Although built in what has been popularly termed a dark age, these structures reveal that the 11th century in northern Ethiopia was vibrant and international. And so here you can see compared Bouras-Vallianatos scaled against the Justinianic Aksumite co-produced basilica, which is based on measurements from Islamic times. My study, based on fieldwork in Ethiopia and Egypt between 2016 and 2019, as well as archival work in Ethiopia, Italy, and the United States, attempts, largely in the absence of written sources, to date and contextualize these three buildings, both in the history of Ethiopia and the broader history of Mediterranean medieval architecture. In my text, I advance three interlinked conclusions. My first concerns the date, which I locate the churches in the mid-11th century with a shared groundbreaking and system of patronage between the year 1000 and 1150. My second reevaluates the building types. I suggest that the churches are local reinventions of aisled cruciform basilicas, here called Tigrayan cruciform churches. Having established a shared 11th century date, I find that these monuments were the product of northern Ethiopian Christian elites who were closely aligned with the Fatimid Caliphate. Their ground plans and use of vaulting presented a shared memory of late antiquity, both of the distant past and buildings that were encountered anew through the mechanism of pilgrimage. Built around the year 1000, these monuments also presented a continuation of local building traditions, as well as select adaptations of forms from both the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt and also coastal South Asia. Tigrayan cruciform churches, while unique, may be understood as an experimental form of architecture in early medieval Ethiopia. My book is divided into 4 chapters with a conclusion. My first chapter, entitled Medieval Architecture in Tigray, Ethiopia, provides an architectural survey of northern Ethiopia's monuments to 1500. So here we have one of the earliest examples at Degum Selassie, which is probably maybe 6th or 7th century, the 7th or 8th century, I should say. Chapter 2, entitled Churches in the Making, is the comprehensive documentation and surveying of the church's architectural fabric, as well as the relative chronology and proposed typology. So in terms of hard data, this is the richest chapter for this. Chapter 3, entitled Inventing Late Antiquity in Medieval Ethiopia, presents the meaning and context behind the unique architecture of the Tigrayan Cruciform Church. I propose that they were a type of revival architecture and a local reinvention and evocation of 6th century Justinianic aisled cruciform churches, as we saw a few slides ago, which were engineered with revolutionary vaulting. I suggest that these churches were wholly the product of the late 11th century, when the elites of East Tigray were once integrated into overseas alliances via overseas trade via an alliance with the Fatimid Caliphate. And here we can see over here, this is the remains of an actual Fatimid Friday mosque that was erected right next to Wukro Cherkos. And then the mihrab was spoliated in later times, which I wrote about in Bukarnas. The fourth chapter, entitled Medieval Ethiopia and the Indian Ocean World System, examines the role of Indian Ocean textiles in medieval Ethiopia and ultimately the decoration of Tigrayan cruciform churches. I suggest that the characteristic ornamental programs were drawn from Indian, Egyptian, and even Armenian liturgical cloths that were traded into northern Ethiopia through Fatimid mercantile channels. And so here you can see how the textile designs were transferred into architectural space. This dense program of architectural ornament, which formally resembles the revetment of contemporary buildings in Iran, constructed under the Seljuk dynasty, which was in Iran and Anatolia. We call this Hazar Bath in Persian. I suggest was a parallel development. They look similar, but it occurred in these parallel two societies because they were both drawing from the same textile sources. And my concluding chapter, entitled A Local Legacy, examines the multivalent afterlife of Tigrayan cruciform churches within Ethiopia. This concluding chapter demonstrates how these 11th century monuments have taken on new meanings since they were hewn as both loci for popular piety. So here we could see a later 19th century restoration, and then also their inspiration for the later Lalibela churches. So I end my presentation there, and I guess we can open it up for questions.
Yes, thank you very much for this brief and impressive presentation of your work in just a few minutes. So it is now open. I think I don't see any question, comment coming on the chat box. Please let us know if you have any. But until questions and suggestions come on the chat box, let's hope I will have something to just put forward. I was in Oxford, as you know, Mikael, last year, just for a couple of months, and we had a discussion with some colleagues there because my project by then was about this global Middle Ages and the place of the Horn of Africa into it. And we started to discuss with experts from various universities across UK and those who came from Africa. And one of the remarks that some scholars made was the importance of the 11th century in the region. So, you know, previously I personally was hesitant to accept these premises. But after reviewing your work and your arguments, I started to refresh and revisit my thought that this period was actually an important period, not a period in the dark. So I just wanted to reflect on this. If you have anything to say, to add more on this until questions appear, you can go on, Mikael, on the importance of the 11th century in the region.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that you're mentioning, because I think one of these things, and again, I'm not the first to make this case. I mean, certainly the Horn East project, the ERC Horn East, led by Julien Loiseau, that really addressed this. But the thing, what makes the Ethiopian Dark Ages dark is an ignorance of Islamic material culture, Islamic documentary sources, and Islamic epigraphy that's in situ. Because when you consider both Arabic accounts and then also Islamic material culture that's in Ethiopia, in fact, we have epigraphy that almost fills up this area. So again, when we're talking about the Christian history of Ethiopia and the revival of the Christian state that I argue takes place in the 11th century, I argue it's really due to the fact that Ethiopia, which Christian Ethiopia, which had been um, kind of after the collapse of the Aksumite Empire, kind of shrunk and was not engaged in overseas trade, was no longer wealthy, that it was in fact sort of Islam's expansion into the highland north that provided reintegrated Christian Ethiopia with the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean through the Red Sea corridor by trading what they
Mm,
had
mm,
with the
mm.
traders there.
Yeah, interesting. So what we have been perceiving as the eastward network and route must have been revisited as we all are trying to do. So the north-south connection was also quite important during this time, given the region and the kingdom itself was quite into this water bodies. Interesting.
I mean, where your work kind of comes in, that's the other element of the Dark
Mm,
Ages, because
mm,
you're dealing with the Shea culture, which
mm,
again, they didn't leave written records, they weren't building churches, but they were very powerful and integrated with the Mediterranean and Indian
mm,
Ocean at that same
mm.
time. So
Yes,
again, Islam and pagan
yes,
non-Christian religions
yes,
that can kind
yes.
of fill in the gaps.
Of course, of course. That is obvious. We have one question from Lucas Butler. Are there any similarities, comparisons with churches in the Christian Nubia?
Yeah, so this is a great point, and this also comes up again. The biggest, probably, I mean, Ethiopia. You would say that in terms of Eastern Christian studies, from Coptic Egypt south, they become less and less studied, and we know
Mm,
less and less
mm,
about them.
mm,
But within the lack of knowledge that we have about Ethiopia, um, the biggest gap that we have, and in fact, Alebachew just presented on this recently, is this what he calls the Middle Nile corridor, connections between Ethiopia and Nubia. Again, we don't know very much about it. We have a handful of documentation that
mhm.
suggests that it was actually a very, very robust relationship. And in fact, I'm publishing an article on the one depiction of someone who was clearly a Nubian in an iconographic mural painting from after these churches were built from the 13th century. That said, in terms of comparisons with churches in Christian Nubia, Nubia is building cathedrals at this time that are cruciform or do have at least applied transept arms. So if they're basilicas, they may have little kind of stubby projecting transepts. From what I've seen in terms of the typology, there isn't really a similarity. Also, in terms of vaulting, Nubian churches, they're done in the medium of mud brick, and it produces what we call a Nubian vault, which is a catenary pointed arch vault that's made through the laying out of the bricks. And the vaulting that we see imitated here are round arch vaults that aren't actually produced in freestanding architecture from this period. And these round arch vaults point more towards the Mediterranean, which in terms of this region of churches would be the Fatimids under Badr al-Jamali, the erection of centered round arch vaults. But Alebachew, you could expand a little more on this kind of missing
Yeah.
Middle Nile corridor if you'd like.
Yes, that is it. We already had, as Mikael has said, I started to develop a bit on this connection because we're always looking out instead of, starting from the connections within the region, Northeast Africa. So anyway, now I think it is time to get back and revisit, given the developments in research, like what Mikael has been doing on, this kind of medieval treasures in the Northern Horn of Africa, and there is a parallel research development on medieval Christian Nubia by different teams from different institutes, like the Polish Center for Mediterranean Archaeology. So now we're thinking to just try to fill the gap by taking comparative intra-regional kind of multidisciplinary assessment. But as he has explained in his book, it has been indicated on how possible connections can be traced between Christian Nubia and that of Ethiopia, because they were both in the heyday of Christianity, from although Nubia totally lost its Christian treasure and completely got converted to Islam, and Ethiopia encountered a stiff problem in the 16th century, as most of you know, but lost its medieval impressive churches, and yet it continued to be the case even today in the highlands of Ethiopia. So yes, research is still needed and it is in progress. Thank you. Thank you, Luca. Any more question?
See one in the Q&A box.
Can you see?
I can see. I can read it if you'd like.
Yes, I don't see the second one. I just see the Lucas Butler one. I'm there.
No, Anastasia Sirotenko.
Okay. Go
Could you elaborate? Oh, yeah, you want to go?
No, go on. I don't
Yeah,
see.
I mean, it's not my job, but
Yeah. Go on. It's okay, but I don't see it. Unfortunately.
all right,
It
let me
is
go.
okay. Sorry. Now I can see.
No, please, I can.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the Byzantine dimension of these churches? Okay, did the artists study in Constantinople, for example, or can these churches be considered as a kind of statement considering the Byzantine artistic development at the same time? Sorry.
So this, oh, please. So this is a great question. And in fact, I'll go to this slide over here. So basically in Aksumite times, mainly in the 6th century, that's sort of the high point of the Byzantine Aksumite alliance in the 6th century, or very early Byzantine. And there we know of 2 churches that for sure were aisled cruciform churches. Aisled cruciform churches meaning like Church of the Holy Apostles back when it stood, the Cathedral of Paros, which still stands in the Cycladic Islands, St. John in Ephesus, etc. And the Aksumites built 2 of these churches. So one is, there was a big church that was then buried in Aksum, and then there was another one, which was the Cathedral of Sana, which we only know from scattered ruins. And so, but then after the 6th century, these monuments were basically removed from Ethiopia's orbit. And so what we see in this 11th century period is the recreation, modified, truncated, because we're dealing with rock cut architecture, but we see a heavily modified, truncated version of the aisled cruciform churches with the vaulted cross arms and the attention to the high spatial hierarchy in the center happening. The key is, though, is that this is happening in the 11th century in Ethiopia, when in Byzantium, they haven't been building these basically since the Aksumites, essentially, since the Aksumites stopped building them. But my argument is that they're either looking at literary sources or pilgrims' accounts of these monuments that they were able to visit anew due to the reconnections that they had with the Mediterranean. So we can think of these as being like a sort of archaizing type of architecture that's either looking towards Byzantium as it existed at its apex, or in fact the Aksumites at their apex, which were very much fused together with the Byzantines. And the most telling part of this, and again, you'll have to read the book for that, But in the chord of the Alps over here, there is a synthronon. The only synthronon in Ethiopia, again, as you know, in Byzantium, they stopped producing synthronoi in this period. And in Aksum, they never produced synthronoi. So this is clearly something that's archaizing. They're clearly looking at Byzantium intentionally. And the synthronon is so small and narrow that it couldn't actually be used. So it's kind of symbolic, we could say.
Great, thank you. I think we're almost out of time. I don't know if the organizers would have something to add.